So in this video, we're going to continue the topic of polynomial functions. And with that, in the previous video, we discussed the end behaviors. Well, in this video, we're going to go one step further, and we're going to talk about what we consider the zeros, also sometimes called the roots. And what those zeros or the roots are, there are x-intercepts. They are where it's going to cross that x-axis. The other thing that we're going to talk about is the multiplicity of the zeros, or of the roots. So I want to first look at one of our functions that is actually already in factored format for us. And so if I look at f of x is equal to 8x times an x minus 1 to the second power times an x plus 3 to the third power, and I'm looking at this is already in factored format. So one thing that I can identify is my degree, and I can also identify the sign of my leading coefficient. So remember, I have three factors here. And so this first one does have an x, which has an exponent of a 1. So I have a 1 plus a 2 plus a 3. So my degree is not 3, it is actually 6. And then my leading coefficient here is an 8, which is positive. So that would mean that my end behaviors, as I'm looking at reviewing from last session, my end behaviors are going to be going up on the right hand side because it's positive, and they're going in the same direction because it is even. Now the next thing that I want to find are the zeros. And again, these are the x-intercepts. It is very nice when things are already in factored format, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each factor, so the 8x, the x minus 1, and the x plus 3, and I'm going to set each of those equal to 0 and solve. So with the 8x, I'm going to divide both sides by 8, so I get that x is equal to still 0. On the x minus 1, I'm going to add 1 to both sides, which will give me that x is equal to a positive 1. And on the last one, I'm going to subtract a 3 from both sides, so I get that x is equal to a negative 3. These are my zeros. These are my x-intercepts. So I would have a point at 0, 0, at 1, 0, and at negative 3, 0. So whenever we're looking at a polynomial and we're wanting to look at how to graph it or anything, one of the things is we have to look at the degree, we have to look at the leading coefficient. Those two things are used to help us determine the end behaviors. Then we have to look at those zeros. And then for each of those zeros, we also have to identify the multiplicity. The multiplicity is the number of times that particular zero occurs. When it is in factored format, it's looking at the exponent for that factor. So what I mean by that is x equal to 0 is this factor right here. And when I look at that factor had a multiplicity or an exponent of 1. So it's going to have a multiplicity of 1. Now the next factor, and the next zero of x equal to 1, its factor here had an exponent of 2. So that means it has a multiplicity of 2. And then for x equaling -3, the factor there, this factor, had an exponent of 3, so it has a multiplicity of 3. So you'll notice that the multiplicities don't actually coincide with the zeros themselves. It just tells us how many times does that occur. Okay, so we have the zeros, we have the multiplicity, and what I've done here is I have actually created a table, and for this table, what I want to look at is I'm still looking at those zeros, okay? So with that, my zeros in this case were a 0, a 1, and a -3. We identified their multiplicities as 1, 2, and 3. Now the last column says, do I touch or do I cross? And this kind of goes back to our degrees and everything. Think about, this has an odd multiplicity here. So an odd multiplicity, what's going to happen is it is going to cross our graph at that x-intercept. Think about it being up and down like this, just like an odd degree for our end behaviors. So it's actually going to cross. So this one will cross. An even multiplicity will actually what we consider touch. So it will go down and down, or it could go up and up, depending upon which direction it's coming from. And so what's going to happen is it's going to go to that number and go back down. Think about the even degrees went the same direction. So this one's going to touch. And the last one, since it has a multiplicity of 3, which is odd, it will cross. Now I want to look at how we would actually graph this. And so I'm going to put in here a little bit of a graph paper so that we can look at it. Okay, so I'm going to look at the zeros and the multiplicities and everything and look at how we graph it. Now, if I scroll back up, notice I had that degree of 6 and the end behaviors were going up and up. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go to my zeros and I'm actually going to graph those zeros. So I have a point at 0, 0, I have a point at 1, 0, and I have a point at -3, 0. These are my 3 intercepts, and we said that the end behaviors were that we were going up and up. So what that means is on this left-hand side, I start up and I go to my first x-intercept, which is -3. And I look at its touch or cross. It says to cross. So I'm going to cross it and then I'm going to go back to my next x-intercept, which is 0. At 0, it tells me to cross again. So I'm going to cross and I'm going to go to my next x-intercept, which is 1. At 1, it tells me to touch. So I'm going to come here and then I'm going to go back up the same direction that I came from. Doing this, you will notice my end behaviors do end up with the up and up on this case. So you have to pay attention to those end behaviors, to everything. Now, I will be very honest with you. Everything in between here, I have no idea what numbers it's on. Okay? And I'm not going to ask you to be precise or anything like that. What I do want you to pay attention to are these end behaviors and then what happens at each of those x-intercepts. One of the things that I don't want you to do is say you come down here, kind of go over here and then come back. Okay? You need to make sure that this is a function And so it must pass that vertical line test. So I don't want to draw over here until I hit in that direction. Okay. Now, I know our drawings are not going to be very fluid, which is okay. But I want you to practice with one of these, and then I'm going to look at a couple of others in the next video, and then go from there.